Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Game Changers, where we talk to some of your favorite personalities in the sports and fantasy sports industry. I'm your host, Dan Harris. You can find me on Twitter at DanHarris80. Now, before we get into today's guest, I want to remind everybody that we are giving away a signed Davante Adams helmet. All you need to do to be entered into our contest is to leave a review for Game Changers on either Apple Podcasts or Stitcher and send a screenshot of that review to gamechangers@fantasypros.com. The contest runs through June 30th, and I'm going to remind you, we are a new podcast, okay? This is, I believe, our 6th episode, so there aren't a crazy amount of entrants into this contest. You have a real shot. So again, just leave an honest review, whatever it says, on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Send a screenshot of that review to gamechangers@fantasypros.com. All right, today's guest. If you like accurate rankings, you will like today's guest. He was the most accurate in-season ranker of 2019. I went back and checked. He has been in the accuracy competition for NFL since 2012. His worst finish was 11th ever. That is insane. If he wasn't such a nice guy, honestly, I'd find his level of success a little irritating, but he is. That's Justin Boone of theScore. You can find him on Twitter at his name, Justin Boone. Justin, thanks for joining me today.
I appreciate you having me. I appreciate the kind words off the top. And yeah, I mean, it was pretty nice to finally get the win this year. I've been on with Bobby and Tags, and I said the same thing. You know, it seemed for a while there like I was kind of the Bills of the early 90s, where I was getting so close every time, but I couldn't get over the hump. And so this year it was pretty nice to finally get the win.
Well, you are following on this podcast Sean Corner and Jake Seeley. So it's basically the Mount Rushmore of accuracy. And I'm going to just throw myself on there because I finished 7th last year. So I'll be the
Congrats,
fourth person. Yeah, thanks. I mean, but yeah, you talk about it. I mean, I hope everybody realizes that we were joking a little bit with Sean last week about how people generally like look at him and be like, oh man, you're slipping because he fell to 13th. I mean, there are like 150 people in this competition. Everybody knows what they're doing. Your level of success, Sean's level of success, Jake's level of success. It's really miraculous. So I'm glad you finally got the top spot. But legitimately, I think you were 4th each of the 2 previous years or something like that. I mean, really just an incredible job.
It's funny, like you say those names, because there's a few other guys you could throw in there. I think, John Paulson seems to always be around the top. There's a few guys that, I feel like I'm specifically competing against those guys. There's guys where I want to see what my accuracy was for that week, and then I'll quickly just go check. Where did they finish? Are they below me? Okay, good.
Sure.
Just because you're a little bit worried about them. And that probably stems from I think it was my 3rd year in the contest, and I was in first for most of the season. And I had my wedding in February that year, and so my buddy set up a bachelor party in around November, and we were going to Miami. I'm a Bills fan, as you could tell, and the Bills were playing the Thursday nighter in Miami. And that was like my Rocky 3 moment, because I had done well in the contest for a couple years. I had been in first for several weeks that year. I was like, I'm obviously going to win this year. I'm on top of the world. I don't need to do as much research this week. It'll be fine. Ooh. So I slapped together the rankings, didn't do so well that week, fell out of first and never got it back. And it was actually John Paulson who finished above me and won that year. So that one really stung for a long time. Yeah.
Well, kudos to you, first of all, for a Rocky 3 reference, because Rocky movies are always grade A over here at Fantasy Pros. But yeah, that is the thing. And I think people don't understand, like, it is, I mean, you've got to be constantly in on your rankings. You can't take a day off or a week off or just give it like a half effort. You have to be crazy, constantly up on it. But we'll get to that. I'll ask you probably a couple of questions about that. But let's start more towards the beginning.
Sure.
I've asked almost everybody who has come on here whether or not they viewed sort of when they were younger, either as a kid or going to high school or going to college, whether or not they said, you know what, I am going to, when I graduate, eventually, I'm going to work in football. Every one of them has pretty much said no. That is not sort of where they were necessarily going after that. Is that the same for you, or were you always, I'm going to be working in football one day?
So for me, I don't know how far we want to go back, but
as far back as you want.
All right.
It's your story.
I first started getting into football around those Bills championship years in the early 90s. I was like, 6 or 7 years old or whatever. Mm-hmm. So very young, very impressionable. And the Bills were so successful and I lived so close to there. So I got really into it at that point, but I wasn't like a hardcore fan, right? I was just a casual fan at the time. And I wasn't playing football at that age. I was playing soccer and hockey and a bunch of other sports, but not football. it wasn't until I got to high school, really. And I didn't even plan on playing football in high school either, but I had a friend, and like the first week was like, oh, let's go to the meeting and see what it's all about. And I was like humming and hawing, and then I finally went, and I just absolutely fell in love. And from that point on, I ditched hockey, I ditched soccer. Really every other sport in my hierarchy just dropped right down, and it was all football from that point on. Now, whether I knew I wasn't going to play football for a living someday, I love the idea of, maybe being a coach or GM or just being around the game somehow. So I didn't really think that I was going to be in football, but I hoped that maybe there was going to be a way for me to be around the game at some point. And I got really lucky. I mean, we could say it right off the top, but I know a lot of people in the industry already know this, but I'm Canadian. So I grew up in Canada, so a bit of a different story than probably a lot of the people that you're having on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, when I got to university and stuff, and I was looking at, I want to specifically be in sports, whether it's football or elsewhere. I want to be in sports. And I was in a journalism program, and my teachers, my profs were all telling me, you got to expand your horizons, do politics, do news, get a taste for everything. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm here. I'm going all or nothing into this sports thing. And I got really lucky. When I was looking for my internship, the Hamilton Tiger Cats director of communications, I got to meet him. They hadn't had an intern in their media department before. And he straight up asked me in that meeting, how much do you know about the CFL? And I don't know if your followers here know that much about Canadian football. I know Hamilton Tiger Cats kind of got on the map a little bit in the last few years when Johnny Manziel got signed by them at one point.
Right.
But he asked me straight up, how much do you know about the CFL? And I was honest with him. I said, absolutely nothing. I've been paying attention to NFL my whole life here. But I said, at that point...
Hold on. Just to be clear. So you were a huge Bills fan. You live in Canada, but you, at this point, and you're graduating from college or you're in college, you know nothing about Canadian football?
I mean, I know a little bit, but I didn't follow it at all. No, I didn't. I lived on a border town. I'm from Niagara Falls, so I was very close to Buffalo there. And, we were crossing the border a lot going into the U.S. And
sure. By the way, went to school in Buffalo, so I was constantly crossing the border to go
the other way
into Canada. So we may have crossed paths at one point.
Hitting up the casinos and whatnot.
That's right.
Nice.
That's right. 19 years old was the minimum age to go into casinos. So we took advantage in college. Anyway, I'm sorry. I digress. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. And I was honest with them. And I said I didn't know much about the CFL at all. I knew the quarterbacks I could have probably named at that time. But I told them at that point there was only 8 teams in the league. I think maybe it's up to 10 now. And I said, I'll learn it in like a day. It's fine. And he thought that was hilarious. And they brought me on. And what a fantastic opportunity. So I had the internship with them for a month or so. And then they brought me on to be their staff writer. And I was there for a few years. And it was just such a great crash course being around a professional team. It was CFL, not NFL. But I got to learn all this stuff. You get to see behind the curtain a little bit how players actually interact with coaches and medical staff and that kind of thing, how players approach their job even. So now when I hear some of the coach speak, when I, see some of the reports trickle out where you kind of got to decipher what's going on, I have this firsthand experience where I got to hang out with the medical team. I got to hang out with coaches and players and the front office and really learn, what goes on within a franchise. And it's really helped me to this point.
So what do you do as a staff writer for an actual team? Because it sounds like you're a journalism major in college. So my guess is that when you thought about it, were you thinking that you would be sort of a sports reporter, a sports journalist working for a newspaper, covering them in that sense? And how is that different than what you're doing as a staff writer for an actual team?
Well, I was like the beat writer for the team. And the funny thing about that is they were not very good the years I were there. They were straight up terrible. They would win 3 games a year. It was very difficult. The first quarter they'd be down 21-0. And they were great about the fact that they allowed me to, write critically about the team to an extent. I always kind of had to put a little bit of hope in there, but I was able to be pretty honest with the coverage. I got to spend, my days out at practice for a couple hours, and, I was always interviewing players and coaches and everything. So I was essentially a beat writer, just paid for by the team. And I was also helping out in the media department and that sort of stuff. And it was like the perfect job coming out of school. But unfortunately, with a lot of those entry-level jobs, it didn't pay so well. So my ambition kind of led me elsewhere.
And where did it lead you to exactly?
So TSN is essentially Canadian ESPN. Just think ESPN, but with more hockey, I suppose.
Right.
And a couple months in there, I got to take over the NFL section. So I started generating content in the NFL section there. And that was my first opportunity to actually, get into fantasy and actually produce some fantasy content. I had been in leagues for years at that point. I played with my buddies when, I was a teenager. They were terrible. I was also probably pretty bad at that point back in that day. When I got to the Tiger Cats, they had a pretty competitive league in that office. The buy-in went way up as well. And that was kind of my, my university course in fantasy football, because I had to get much better in a very short period of time if I was going to contend. And I was able to over those years. And that's where the passion kind of really started for fantasy. And when I was at TSN, I got to start producing content, and it wasn't that much, but on top of the NFL stuff I was doing fantasy content sort of on the side over and above my regular job. And that's when I started putting out rankings. And that's when I found a little site called FantasyPros that was having this expert competition. And I didn't consider myself an expert, or even a true analyst in the industry at that point. I was kind of just getting started out, but I contacted you guys to find out, could I get into this contest? And you guys were great and allowed me in. And I was really just going to, let's just see. I'm competitive. I didn't think I was going to, place well, but I wanted to see, where do I stack up against all these analysts in the industry? And I was fortunate enough, I finished 8th in that first year. And then that really got the competitive juices flowing. Because then I was like, all right, if I can finish 8th, I think I might be able to win this whole thing. Yeah. And then we went from there.
So that was sort of my question was, did you know how good you were at this at the time that you started? Because again, you are not somebody who started in, I've seen a lot of people who start and they join the accuracy competition and they finish 125th or something for, their first year. And then they work on, their methodology or their projection system, and then they gradually get better as they refine it. You came right out of the gates and started with like an unprecedented streak. Did you know, even before you started, that you were like, you know what? I'm really good at this. This is something I can really do and eventually do full time.
I didn't know I was really good. No, I thought I was a pretty good fantasy player. I didn't know if that would translate to the rankings, because in that first year, I wasn't even really sure how the rankings accuracy worked. Back then it was like a percentage that you got. Now it's kind of everyone's ranked in each position. And even the top percentages back then were like, you were lucky to get 70%. It was normally like low 60s kind of thing for the top guys. And I wasn't sure how any of that was calculated. I was just kind of looking at it like, here, I have my way of approaching this. I was already kind of making rankings on my own even before I had started doing it professionally. So no, I had no idea that I was going to be, that accurate at it, or that I was going to be able to maintain it over several years. But I did. The second year in the contest, I finished 11th. The third year was that one I talked about earlier, where, I probably the one that I should have won and really
party, man.
Really screwed it up.
Rookie mistake. Yep.
Just so foolish. I did my best though. I will say, I woke up Sunday morning with a pretty good hangover at the bachelor party. I was like, yeah, I'll put the rankings together. It'll be fine. Not so much. But I was able to continue to get better. And that's one of the big things. I'm sure, all the people that you're talking to on this podcast, they're going to tell you never stop improving at this, right? Every year I'm adding more stats. I'm tweaking things. I'm realizing what might not be as important that maybe I thought was very critical before, and finding new stats that, I wasn't taking this into account as much, and maybe I should now. So it's constantly just trying to figure out, because there's not one stat out there. We know this. There isn't one predictive stat that's going to be able to give you the answers at any position. It's putting all of the pieces together to form that puzzle. It's injuries, it's matchups, it's historical stats, it's everything. You're trying to build that all into, one picture where you could put together the rankings. So, I've been fortunate that I have gotten, a little better over the years here. And I've been fortunate that after, a few years where I was at TSN, theScore came calling, and I had a coworker. He was actually a former coworker at the time, but he had a friend at theScore who was looking for an NFL supervisor and was having a hard time finding somebody. And this guy thought of me. I didn't apply for the job. He just sort of told me to, send my resume directly to that guy. I did. And very quickly I got the job at theScore. And now, I was very fortunate that I was in, the NFL world at this point. I'm now running a team of 6 to 8 writers, covering the league year round. It was fantastic, but that job I wasn't hired to do fantasy there, right? I had some success in the industry, but I wasn't hired to do fantasy. So once again now, because I had that passion for fantasy, because at that point I was like, the goal now is I want to do this full time. I want to have a year-round job where I am just focused on fantasy football, as awesome as my initial gig was at theScore. So I kept pushing towards that, and it required me to, put in long hours. It required me to do a ton of work on the side for fantasy and work from home. I remember one night where my shift ended at like 1 or 2 in the morning because of the West Coast games and everything. And I had to get my rankings up for the next day, and they weren't done. So I had to make this decision. All right, do I stay at the office and keep working? Do I go home and maybe, wake my wife up and all that sort of stuff? So I decided I'm going to stay at the office. And I didn't leave the office till 6 or 7 a.m. the next day. And I had gotten there at, 2 or 3 in the afternoon the day before. And when I was walking out to my car, the parking lot attendant was there. The guy who I had paid for my ticket the afternoon before was showing up for work the next morning. And he was like, buddy, are you just leaving now? And I was like, yeah, man, I'm sure I had massive, bags under my eyes and stuff. But the rankings were done. I was finally happy with them. And that's the key. And that's really been the big thing for me. And I learned it from football, football in high school. I learned how far you can push yourself. If you want to be good at something, I really wanted to win when I was a kid playing sports, but it wasn't until I started playing football where I realized, wait, you can actually push yourself to a whole nother level. If you outwork everybody else, you're probably going to find success. And it's bled into the rest of my life, and especially the fantasy industry. So, when it comes now to the season, I'm staying up on Saturday nights during the season until 1 or 2 in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
I'm waking up at 4 in the morning. I'm trying to get any edge I can. I don't want to miss any news item or, piece of information that's sneaking out there. I want to make sure I'm giving myself the best chance to be as accurate as I can be, and it's worked.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I didn't realize. So when you were hired at theScore, was fantasy part of your job that you were doing originally? Was it combined with overseeing sort of NFL generally, or are you just NFL at this point and you're also just doing fantasy on the side?
It wasn't. It was just fantasy on the side. I mean, I was doing some of it for theScore still. They were loving, the additional content I was providing, and I wanted to provide it. But it was over and above my regular gig, and I had to keep pushing because when I first got there, we weren't actually doing very much fantasy coverage, and I kept pushing that as, that's an area that we can grow in. And thankfully we have. And in the last couple of years, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to theScore, to the management at theScore. In the last 2 years, they made me full-time fantasy. I got that full-time fantasy job, started working from home. And in the first full calendar year where I was full-time fantasy, I finished first in the contest. So it's all really worked out.
Well, now you have no excuses.
Exactly. Now I have to win every year,
correct.
Right?
I mean, that's the thing. You made the classic mistake of finally setting the bar too high there. But look, your story is great, and I love, and frankly, I did not realize it, even when you got to theScore, that you weren't really even doing fantasy, that you still at that point were sort of grinding it out on the side. And the word grind is a word sort of that you hear a lot in the industry, but that is really so much of what it is, which leads me to really my final question before we get into the last segment is just, if you're offering advice, a lot of people who listen to this not only want to just are interested in hearing how their favorite analysts got into the business, but they also want to break into the business themselves. I get a lot of emails from people being like, oh, do you have any advice? So what's the one piece of advice if you could offer somebody who is just getting started, who wants to eventually be you and finish number one in the accuracy competition? What's your advice on getting started in this industry?
I think I kind of touched on it there. Just outwork everybody else. It's not hard. You see these success stories of people that are willing to go that extra mile in whatever field they're in. And I think that's the way to do it. I think that's the approach that you should be taking, no matter what the field is. And for me, it's just when you're doing that extra work, when you're putting it all together, be undeniable. Just don't let anyone tell you can't do it, because you're doing everything you possibly can to get to that goal. And that's what I did. And that's what, I really credit that as to what helped me, rise in the industry and get to where I am now.
Yeah, above all else, I mean, there are a lot of things that go into all these success stories, but my father-in-law, who's just kind of this blue-collar Massachusetts guy, just, straight up always says it is nothing that a little elbow grease couldn't do, and that's really kind of what I've always felt like in every area of life. So much of success is just willing to put in the time, willing to commit yourself, willing to do it. I know when I started, again, I was a lawyer. I would come home at night and I would just write, and I would just nonstop, basically every night I would come home. My wife would always be like, "Why are you doing that?" I'm like, "Because that's what it takes. If you want to do this, that's what you have to do. You have to fully commit yourself." So your story is great, and it has a similar theme to a lot of people who have made it in this industry. So
I will say too, though, I owe a big debt of gratitude to the management of theScore, like I said. To a lot of people along the way that gave me those opportunities, the folks at TSN that allowed me to start doing fantasy content for the first time, really. To FantasyPros. If it wasn't for FantasyPros, I always joke, I would just be, some guy screaming on the rooftop that I'm a good fantasy player and that I'm pretty accurate, right?
Yeah.
They really allowed me to get credibility and to establish myself. And then to friends and family. You have to have friends and family that are very understanding of, the hours that you're going to put in, of the plans that are going to be canceled because I'm not happy on Saturday night with where my rankings are and something seems wrong and I got to keep working at it. And my wife especially has been phenomenal for that and extremely understanding. I was a little worried last year because last season was the first time that when I said football season was back, she was like, "Already?" And I was like, that might be the first sign that she's, getting a little fed up with it. But then I won the contest, so that smoothed everything over. Yeah. It was all worth it at that point.
Yeah, I've been talking to my wife and kids generally about like our plans for the rest of the year, and my wife said something. I was like, That's August. That's starting to get into fantasy season. It's prime draft season. We can't.
When it
we
begins.
Got to push it earlier. So it's how it is. It's how it is for all of us. But yeah, no. And again, that is part of the accuracy competition. Is that a lot of people who are tremendous fantasy analysts who a lot of consumers out there they might have never heard of. That's one of the reasons why we love the accuracy competition, both because it's just a way to be able to gauge accuracy, but also because it gives sort of a voice and it gives, notoriety in a positive way to some analysts who, again, might just be shouting from the rooftops and saying, "No, I'm really good at this. I'm really good." And it allows people to sort of get a platform. So that is one of the many reasons why we love it. All right. Your story was great. We end on something called the blitz here, which is 10 questions basically about yourself. Maybe I throw in one or two random trivia questions, which you're not supposed to get. But I do score you, and I do get to judge whether or not your answers are correct. So even though they're about you, I have the full authority to deem them incorrect if I so choose. No argument.
All right. Let's do it.
Okay. Number one. So last year was the first year that you won the accuracy competition. But when you start, you can use last year or just generally when you're in the competition. When you start getting down to those last few weeks, you alluded to it earlier. When you get down to those last few weeks and you're fighting it out in the accuracy competition, are you actively monitoring, like on a Sunday or on a Monday, the rankings of your top competitors that you're like right behind you in the accuracy competition? Or are you just setting your rankings at that point and letting it go?
Well, I talked to Jake Seeley about this last year, actually, because we're friends. We did a TV show a couple of years ago. And he asked me that very question. Are you kind of basing it off everyone else? And what I do is when I have my rankings done right before they have to get locked in, so whether we're talking about Thursday, they get locked before that game, and then they get locked on Sunday morning, I do one final sweep where I look at the ECR of everyone just to see, is there anybody that I'm like way off on where like I have somebody 20 spots ahead? And if that's the case, then I'll do a quick, okay, am I missing something here? Is there something I didn't see? Or maybe I just have the information that everybody else doesn't have. And if I'm confident in that, then we're good to go. And I might make, little tweaks at that point. But no, I'm not really looking at it until those rankings get updated, the accuracy of all the experts. And then, like I said, then I want to go take a quick look, where did Sean Kerner finish?
Right. When
where
that
did John
drops,
Paulson
I bet
finish?
You're scanning nonstop to be like, where
am
is
I still ahead of those guys? Did they make up ground this week? That I, give them a little more ground on them. So,
yeah.
And especially because John came back and beat me that one year. And I'm pretty sure John finished second last year as well. He was the one guy where I kept looking, wait, is he gonna catch me again this time? So I was worried right until the end. And last year in December, my wife got really, really sick, just like a cold flu kind of thing, but she was sick for a couple weeks. And I was like, there is no way that I'm getting this cold right now. Nothing's going to slow me down. So I was sleeping on the couch for several weeks there. I was drinking as much water and taking vitamins and doing everything I possibly could. And I didn't even get sick. Normally, if one of you get a cold, it kind of spreads through the house. I managed to avoid it and got to the finish line.
Man, you were just,
I was dialed in. Yeah,
everything was turning up roses for you last year. All right, I'll mark that as correct. I believe I finished 7th in the accuracy competition last year, but I was teasing Greg Smith and Rudy Gamble a little bit because I know everybody hates kickers, but I put in kicker rankings even though they're not measured in the accuracy competition.
I also put in kicker rankings.
And I was so close to that top spot. I think it was top like once, and then I was just fighting it out with Greg. So legitimately everything else, because I was like, the real accuracy competition at this point, I'll just let it see. But as soon as the results came out, whenever they come out on Tuesday or Wednesday, I would always check the kicker certified. That would be like, all right, this is the one thing I'm really going to look at. And Greg knows he beat me, and I'm pretty sore about it, but that's fine.
But anyway, here's the problem. Here's the problem with finishing first, because I think a couple years ago, I finished first in kickers. And one of the problems with that is now you get way more kicker questions on Twitter.
I know.
Everybody wants to ask the kicker questions. And I'm always like, man, like that's the one that I spend the least amount of time probably worrying about. Partially because it's not in the contest, and partially because I just find that one to be so difficult to predict.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I am #don't drop team kickers. Everybody's trying to get rid of them. I want to keep them, but that's fine. I realize I'm in the minority. Anyway, that's correct. Question 2. You know what? I was going to ask you something about Canadian football versus American football, but I know you like American football better, essentially, correct?
I will be honest, even like those couple years that I worked in the CFL, once I stopped working in the CFL, and I shouldn't admit that, I still have a lot of friends, that work there, but I haven't watched a game since. I haven't gone to a game. I could have got free tickets probably whenever I wanted. I haven't gone to a game. I haven't watched a game. That was sort of, a means to an end for me. Like a lot of the players actually that, go into the CFL also are using that as a stepping stone. There's been lots of guys, Cameron Wake always jumps to mind because he was a guy who was in the league at the time when I was working there. And he was right away. It was like, this guy is just unbelievable. How did this guy not make it to the NFL? He was sort of like a tweener, and then he got his opportunity and obviously shined once he got into the league.
Well, look, you've basically admitted it. So I'll go ahead and ask the question. What is better for the record? And hopefully your old colleagues are not listening to this. What is better? What's superior, Canadian football or American football?
It's definitely the NFL. And it's, unfortunately, it's not close. I think, the CFL is great. There's a lot of people who are super passionate about it in Canada, and I hope it sticks around. I think it could be, I'd love to see them even, I know no one in Canada wants to hear this, but I'd love to see them adopt the NFL rules and kind of make it more of a feeder system instead of, maybe the XFL or one of those leagues eventually stepping up and taking that over. It would be nice to see the CFL be more of a feeder system for the NFL, but it already kind of is in a way. There's a lot of players that make the jump.
All right. Well, I obviously agree with you, so I'm marking that correct as NFL is superior to the CFL. What is the most rewatchable movie of all time, in your opinion?
Wow, that is a phenomenal question.
Thanks.
That is a very, very good question. I'm saying that to try to buy myself time.
That's
here.
Fine. That's what everybody does. They
of course.
Comment on the question. This is so good. I haven't really thought of it. Let me think. They're just buying time. Could be, obviously, just your favorite movie is fine.
Yeah, there's a couple that immediately pop to mind. I will say Good Will Hunting is one that whenever it is on, I will, no matter what part of the movie it's at, I'm stuck there till the end. Fight Club is another one. Those two are probably two that pop up, anytime I see those on, but there's so many. Gladiator was on not that long ago, and it was like halfway through the movie, and I was like, are we not entertained? I'm in all the way. Let's do it. So.
Yeah, you just have to, there are some movies that come on, and my wife never understands this. I'm the type of person who will just watch a movie over and over and over. If it's like running for a week every night on TBS, if I happen to come across it, I almost always just sit there and watch it.
But I will say that's only during the off season. During football season, I all shows that come out, movies, they all get pushed back until the off season when I can catch up.
Well, I'll mark Good Will Hunting as your answer, and I'll mark that correct. You got a number. What do you think of them apples? All right. What's one thing you look forward to doing the most as soon as the grind of the football season is over? As we've said, throughout the football season, you're kind of off limits. You're not doing anything. Once it's over, what's like the first thing? What do you look forward to doing?
Well, it's nice that the fantasy season and that grind falls right around the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, I think it's going to be a little screwed up because normally you set the rankings in and it's a couple days right before Christmas and stuff shows up. So you get to kind of relax and spend time with the family finally, who, I've probably not spent as much time as I should over the last few months before Christmas. But I'm going to give a really boring answer, and it's just sleep. Like it's like my inner clock just never shuts off. I can't relax during the season. So by the end of the year, I'm wound pretty tight. I'm not able to have those mornings. And really now, and it's probably because of this contest, I'm not great at sleeping in to begin with.
Yep.
But when the season ends, normally during the holidays, I'll have that, 1 or 2 days where I finally get that full 8 hours of sleep and I wake up feeling like a whole new person and I'm running around the house doing stuff. And I feel like a human being again. I feel like during the season, I'm maybe a little bit more of a robot at times.
Yeah. Well, I realize it's a quote unquote boring answer to say sleep, but it's 100% the correct answer. I mean, there's absolutely, it's so exhausting. And yeah, I just feel like I'm so wired anyway now all the time that I can barely sleep. And I think it probably came from my first year in the accuracy competition where I didn't expect to do really well and I did well. And I was just sort of jazzed up and I basically haven't come down from the high since.
Well,
all right.
I'm not big into coffee either. That's always been one where I was like, if I keep not getting first place, I'm going to have to incorporate more coffee or something.
Yeah.
So during the season, if I do have coffee, I get jittery, like it's too much for me. So, So in the off season, just getting to actually relax finally, it's a great feeling.
All right, here is an actual trivia question, which somebody asked me to ask you. There's no way you're going to know it, but I can't let you sweep the entire thing. You said you worked for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, right?
Correct.
Who is the Hamilton Tiger Cats all-time leader in points scored?
Wow.
There's no way. If you get this, I'm ending the competition and giving you a perfect score.
It's probably going to be wrong, but I became friends with him while I was there because he had been a coach and he was working for the team as like an ambassador at that point. I'm going to say Ron Lancaster.
Okay, that's incorrect, unfortunately. The answer apparently is Paul Osbaldiston. I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
2,856 points. So that is an incorrect answer. If you knew that one, forget it. I mean, I'm
familiar with. Well, I'd like to give Ron has passed away, but he was just another phenomenal. He was a former coach, a former player, and a guy that just had a ton of insight. I had so much, they say, Tuesdays with Maury kind of thing. Well, Ron was kind of that for me. I got to sit in his office and just pick his brain, and he had so much knowledge. And another thing that's helped me along the way.
All right. Question number 6. We recently did a draft among the FantasyPros analysts of all-time players using a fantasy lineup. So you don't care about individual fantasy seasons. You're taking a player at his peak and kind of building the best offense using a fantasy lineup. So 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and a tight end. So with that in mind, who do you think should be the first overall pick? So you get any player, you can take into account position scarcity, in their prime, who would be your number 1 pick?
You probably got to go, as weird as it sounds, I'm probably going to go LaDainian Tomlinson there. Ooh. I don't know if that's an age thing, but like production wise, he's just somebody that he was putting up insane numbers for a few years there.
No, he was an early round pick for sure, but I will let you know.
Jerry Rice is another one that
Jerry Rice was the first pick.
Was he the first pick?
He was the first pick overall by Kyle Yates. And
maybe it's just the fact that this year we're already kind of going, well, receivers deep. We got to get those running backs early. So I had running backs on the mind, but I'll stick with LaDainian. He was just phenomenal for a few seasons there.
All right. LT was absolutely phenomenal. I will have to mark it wrong though, because Jerry Rice probably is the right answer. Or Barry Sanders could have been up there. There was a little bit of that too, but
behind that offensive line, man, some of those runs that he made where he, looked like he was going to lose 10 yards and he managed to somehow take it to the house.
I know, the best. But as a Jets fan, although it was obviously not in his prime,
those were the bad LaDainian years.
It doesn't matter. I still have a soft spot for LT. All right. Number 7. I heard a rumor about this. I want to make sure it's true. Is it true that in Canada, you don't get the typical U.S. commercials during the Super Bowl that everyone goes nuts over? And if so, does that detract at all from the experience?
Yeah, it definitely does. And, I used to try to rig it up so that, and I don't know if this is completely legal or not, but we used to try to rig it up so that we could get the American commercials. But here's the problem with that. There's like a slight lag that way. If you do it that way, you're like 5 seconds behind or something.
Can't
And
do
now if you're on Twitter, stuff's popping up on Twitter. What a touchdown. And you're like, oh, next play is going to be a touchdown. Great. Right. So, but the way commercials come out now, that might've been a bigger deal 10 years ago. The way it comes out now, where like most of the commercials come out even before the day of, so it's not that big of a deal. And everybody's writing the article after best commercials, so you can get caught up pretty quickly after.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll mark it correct. Okay, you may need a little bit of time to stall to think of the correct answer here, but my friend, Bobby Sylvester, who you know, is obsessed with Mike Boone. Obsessed with Mike Boone, always. He mentions him all the time. If you and Mike Boone started a music band or any sort of company together, what do you think you'd call it? Justin Boone and Mike Boone. It's a tough one. I know. This one always puts people on the spot when I give something like this. I can tell you what I would be thinking.
B&B Music Factory. Wasn't there like CNC Music Factory way back in the day?
I love it. B&B Music Factory. I love it. I was thinking more like the Boonies, like the Goonies, like the movie. Oh, that might be before your time. I don't know.
My dad, I don't know if you know who Marcel Dion is, a famous NHL hockey player.
I do, actually, yes.
Okay. So my uncle was really good friends with him back in the day, and my uncle has since passed, but they owned a trophy shop at one point. I was much too young to remember this, but I've been told, and it was called Boone's Dion's, kind of a strange name for a trophy shop, but
wow.
They had a trophy shop at one point together, and they were friends all the way to the end. They were very close.
Well, I really love B&B Music Factory, so that's definitely correct. Okay, number 9. I asked this of Sean Corner last week. A few people requested that I ask it again because they found it a funny question.
All right.
What is something that you're terrible at? Like, not like algebra or something like that, but like a basic life skill that you're like, man, that's not my jam.
I don't know if it's a life skill, but I have a very easy answer for you here. It's drawing. It's that kind of art. Any sort of Pictionary, I'm not your guy. Don't pick me on your team. You know, there's a lot of like board games where like there's a great one that we played at my family Christmas last year where you write down a topic, a person, whatever, a subject, and you pass it to the next person. They have to draw what that is, and then they hand the drawing, and then that person has to guess, write down what they think the drawing is. I screwed that game up so badly for everybody. I am the worst. I don't know if I'll ever get better at it. So if you're ever in a situation where we need something drawn, I'm not your guy at all.
Got it. All right. So everybody, if the world's going to end unless we draw a perfect turtle, nobody go to Justin Boone. By the way, I'm completely with you. My daughter is very artistic. She's 9 and she makes fun of me nonstop. She's like, I don't even know what this is supposed to be. I don't, it's hurtful, but it's accurate at least. Okay. Last question. If you had to leave your house or your apartment immediately and forever, so you're not coming back there, it's on fire, you've been discovered as a secret agent, something like that, and you could only take one thing along with you, an inanimate object. We're not talking your wife or anything or something or a dog or anything like that. One object from your house that you have to take. You've got like 3 minutes. The authorities are closing in. You're busted. What are you taking from your house?
I don't know that I'm taking anything, to be honest. Is that bad? Like, I don't really have anything that I always thought that was interesting because, people talk about that question sometimes. If there was ever a fire, what's the first thing that you save? But now that, like, I think pictures were the obvious answer, but now that pictures are, loaded up on the cloud and you have them on your phone and stuff, it's not as much of a concern. And, like, there's, I don't know if the answer is supposed to be like my FantasyPros trophies here that
I would think
purposely
that it would
set
have
up
been
for us today.
I would think it would be your number one accuracy trophy. I mean, that's where I would go if I could.
I don't think I'm going to get the point for this. I think you're going to dock me, but I'm going to say there's nothing. There's nothing like maybe my wallet because I wouldn't want to go to the trouble of having to get all the cards remade and because that would be such a pain. But I don't really have a valuable that I feel that strongly about that I absolutely have to have. I'm pretty easy. It's like what is it? Robert De Niro in Heat? Like
no.
You can move. Move in 30 seconds.
That is literally what I was about to say. I had marked it correct. It's correct, and I was gonna say I'm a little disappointed in the answer because I wanted something tangible, but I was going to mark it correct because of Robert De Niro in Heat. And because
you got to be ready to move.
Never let yourself get attached to anything that you couldn't walk away from in 30 seconds if the heat is on or something like that, right?
There's also a movie, Up in the Air with George Clooney where he has that big speech about like the things in your life that kind of weigh you down and a house and all this stuff. And I have a lot of those things, but I feel like, none of them are really super important to me.
Man, Boone, I would give you like 6 extra points just for the Heat reference, because I was legitimately about to say that, but I don't have the authority to do that. I will mark it correct, though, which is 8 correct. That's good. That's like a really good score. You did really well. No wonder you're the most accurate expert.
I'll take it. Thanks.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, Justin, it has been a pleasure. Just remind everybody, we've talked about it, of course, but remind everybody where they can find more of you and your work.
Everything's available at theScore, and one of the great things about theScore, I know there are a ton of phenomenal fantasy draft kits out there, but our fantasy draft kit at theScore, it's free. It doesn't cost you a dime. It has my rankings in there, which are the most accurate in the industry, as of last year. So they can find all of that. All you got to do is download the Score app, the Score Fantasy Football Podcast, which, as you can see, the sign behind me there. We're putting episodes out weekly right now. That ramps up even more as we get closer to the season. So yeah, and on Twitter at Justin Boone, hit me up with all your questions. Happy to answer all that stuff. Getting really excited because, now it seems, we're not 100% sure, but it seems like we're going to have football this season, and this is the time of year when it starts to ramp up a little bit.
Yeah, it's looking good, and you're starting to get that feeling like, oh boy, all right, I've got to really plan out what I'm going to be doing right here to get ready for this season. But anyway, it was great talking to you. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It was great.
All right, I want to remind everybody that we are giving away that signed Davante Adams helmet. All you got to do is leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Send a screenshot of that review to GameChangers@FantasyPros.com. Again, it's running through June 30th. Not that many entrants yet because it's a relatively new podcast, so you've got a real chance to win it. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week.